So again, welcome. My name is Stacy Aquero. I'm the Associate Director for International Admissions, and today's session is really to give some tips and advice on beginning the application process and submitting that application to Stony Brook University as we open our application for spring 25 and fall 2025 today, August 1st. So congratulations on beginning this journey of applying to university. We know sometimes that it can seem daunting or overwhelming, and especially for international students where it is a completely different system than maybe you understand or have had information given to you by other counselors on your home country institution system. However, of course, things are always different in other countries, including in the United States. So first, I wanted to help you understand a couple of useful terms because, again, it can be different, and there is ease to applying once you have an understanding of just some basic terminology. And keep in mind, even as not an international student, these are new terms for students at any given stage about to enter the application process. They're not terms used all of the time or research that has been done prior to starting that process. So it is a new vocabulary for many families and students as you enter this stage. So it's really important to understand in the US that there's lots of choices. There's over 4,500 options of universities, colleges, technical institutions to choose from in the US. So how do you start to really narrow that down? And I will talk a little bit about finding the right fit briefly, just to help give people a sense. But there is probably another session on our YouTube page specifically devoted to that as well. In the US, schools are divided among public universities and private universities. In some countries and cultures, it is assumed that public universities are superior to private universities or vice versa. In the US, a public university versus a private university really deals with its affiliation and funding to the state. So public universities are not federal universities except for our service academies, which are military academies. So our public universities, like Stony Brook University, means that it's funded through our state of New York. So we are part of the SUNY system, the State University of New York, spelled SUNY. Whereas private schools are funded solely through tuition and endowments, and will have to follow the state in which they reside in's guidelines. Their education is not partially funded, and they're through the state in which they are at. In terms of things like rankings and other prestige factors, you will see in the ranking systems, there are both public and private universities, although there will be sort of separate public ranking systems as well, or within that, publics can be have sort of, a separate ranking. So for instance, Stony Brook University is ranked number 58 among all universities. So keep in mind that 4,500 number in the US, but as a public institution, as part of the SUNY institution, we are the #1 public university in New York State. So within that, I probably already interchanged the word university and college a lot. And there are several types of universities that are within those 4,500. And we talk about research universities. We can use the word college, community college, technical, vocational schools. A research university will tend to be on a larger side, have research opportunities, research funding to the university that could be on the federal, state, or private level, and will have a designation of a research university. Just because a school is not a research designated university does not mean that research is not happening on that campus. Almost every campus in the US will have some kind of research happening. Faculty at all campuses are required to engage in research. It's a matter of when you're a research designated university, you have a specific amount of a quantity of research and a quantity amount of dollars that's going to research at the university. A research university tends to, this is a generalization and doesn't have to be, but most of the time tends to not only offer undergraduate programs, but master's and PhD level programs, and tends to be on the larger side. Whereas traditionally a college may be on the more smaller side, may not offer as many graduate programs, and may be considered a little more liberal arts. Whereas a community college is a 2-year degree, where then students often transfer into the 4-year degree. Great advantage of a community college is where students have the opportunity to do a little more exploration of maybe what they're interested in studying, as well as it is typically very cost-friendly, and so students who are looking to have some options on cost tend to choose community college. There are many community colleges in the United States that have plenty of international students, as well as residential programs for international students. So it's a really great option. Technical and vocational schools, programs that specialize in some specific careers or trades. We also sometimes in those technical areas will have pathway programs or ESL only programs, intensive English type of programs only. Some other useful terms that's really important to understand is the word freshman, or really first year students, versus a transfer student. So when you are about to apply and you start your common application or your SUNY application, again, that State University of New York, or the coalition application, one of the first things they're going to ask you is if you're a first year student or a transfer student. And a lot of students just assume that they're first year students regardless, because it's the first time they're applying to Stony Brook. However, a first year student or a freshman student means that you are applying to college for when you have completed high school and have not attended any university level courses after high school graduation. It's okay if you have AP level or any kind of transfer courses from a university while in high school, you would still be a first year student. But if you graduated high school and have now taken even one university level course, you would be a transfer student. Of course, other programs include graduate and PhD programs, as well as professional level programs. I talk about this a little bit, even though as an undergraduate admissions office and someone who's applying to, as a first year transfer, would not be yet a graduate student or applying to graduate programs. A lot of students sometimes think, well, I want to study X, meaning medicine. I want to get my MBA, so I'm just applying straight to graduate programs. No, those programs will require you to have an undergraduate degree first, your bachelor's degree, which is the degree you receive when you start as a first year or a transfer, and complete that degree, and then apply to those graduate level programs. In the US and at Stony Brook, there are lots of different ways to apply in terms of when and deadlines. At Stony Brook, we have a few of these, not all of these options, but our regular decision means that there is a deadline and students have to apply by that deadline, typically submitting all of your documents by that deadline. So when I say our regular decision deadline is January 15th, while yes, you can still fill out that application on January 15th and submit it, if we don't have all of your supporting documents by then, your application is actually considered late. So you really want to apply several days before the published deadline for any of these deadlines to ensure that everything else, including all of your supporting documents, are received. And we'll talk about supporting documents later on, but things like test scores and transcripts and essays and letters of reference. Some schools will have rolling admission, meaning they will have an application open until they fill all of their seats, which means this could mean they close, if they open today, like most schools do on August 1st, they could close by November 1st if they're filled. They could not close until March or April or May for the following fall semester. So it really can vary depending on school. At Stony Brook, we do not have rolling admission. We will have our deadline, our regular decision deadline, as January 15th. Some schools will have early decision, also known as ED. That is also something we do not have at Stony Brook, but early decision for other universities means you are applying by a certain date. Typically, could be sometime November 1st to December 1st. And if you are admitted to that university, you are required to commit to that university and withdraw all of the other applications that you have completed to date. Early action, which Stony Brook does have, EA, is our deadline is November 1st. That means that you complete your application, again, submitting all of your supporting documents, and we guarantee to give you a decision by a certain date. So at Stony Brook, we guarantee to give you your admissions decision by the end of January when you apply early action, but you are not required to commit until the May 1 deadline for that. So really, a really great opportunity for students who want to get their application in early, get their decision in early, so they have time to evaluate all of their decisions from universities and really make a well thought out decision as to where you are going to call home for the next 4 years at a particular university. Other useful terms, financial aid versus scholarships. At most universities in the US, those terms can also be used a little interchangeably. Officially, financial aid means funds that are coming from the federal US government, perhaps the state, as well as the institution. And typically that could be what's known as need-based or merit-based. And financial aid officially tends to a lot of times cover that need-based money. And that need-based money is typically for US citizens who are showing proof of need through a FAFSA form, a federal application in the US that will require income documentation of your parents. There is an international student financial aid application for schools that will look at need for international students. At Stony Brook, we only offer merit-based aid for international students. So merit-based aid is based on the merit of your application, so test scores, mainly your high school GPA. Each school can be different. At Stony Brook, we offer merit-based scholarships. There's no separate forms or applications for that. And we offer $1,000 to $6,000 in merit scholarships. There are some other scholarships that are part of an application, not need-based, but we will talk about those at the end of the session. But just to make you aware of some other terms related around financial aid and scholarship, there are some schools, not Stony Brook, who will review applications as need aware versus need blind, meaning, are you looking at an application based on the need, the financial need of a student? So there are schools who will meet need of a student. So you do want to do a little research to see if that is something what you may need or what you may be interested in. Every school in the US, including Stony Brook, will also have a price calculator on it. And that is something that I highly encourage even our international students to use, which will help gauge potentially what scholarships may be available to you and what the final costs at Stony Brook will be. So other useful terms and concepts as you are considering the application. What is the school's test policy? Test optional, what does that mean? Test optional will often refer to SAT or ACT only. So if a school is saying they are test optional, it means that you do not have to submit an SAT score or an ACT score, which is the standardized testing for most schools in the US. Many schools are test optional. Some for fall 25 have begun to reinstate their testing policies. At Stony Brook, we are continuing to be test optional. Some students ask if they can submit their PSAT versus the SAT. A PSAT is considered a practice SAT. And while you do get an official score, it is not something used for admission purposes. So being that we are test optional, it is your choice to submit your SAT scores or not. So that is something that is personal to you. And we encourage students to look on our website for what we call our middle 50% of what our testing scores are. And we generally recommend if students fall in that range, they can then consider submitting their SAT scores. It is not required at all. There's no advantage or disadvantage for submitting them. We don't have scholarships that are attached to those test scores, so it is really up to you. I also remind students that test optional does not mean English proficiency optional. Students are still required to submit English proficiency test scores, things like a Duolingo, TOEFL, IELTS. Stony Brook accepts other exams, but most universities in the US have a separate policy on English proficiency versus an SAT, ACT policy. So it is really important that you are understanding both of them. It's also important to understand that when you are filling out the application, that it's going to ask you for what your estimated GPA is, or CGPA, which is a cumulative GPA. Your cumulative GPA from high school is from grades 9, 10, and 11, unless you've already graduated high school, which would include grade 12. Because you are applying nearly a year prior to when you are going to start at university in the US, we are only reviewing transcripts from grades 9, 10, and 11 because your 12th grade transcripts are not available yet, again, unless you've already graduated. So you are not waiting for predicted grades or for you to finish year 12 before you apply, because then you will miss the deadlines. So when you are asked for that cumulative GPA, you are kind of taking grades from 9, 10, and 11. Most international students are on different grading scales than a US grading scale of 100 or even a 4.0. We know it's confusing. At Stony Brook and most other schools, we are going to recalculate that on a US scale. So we're not as concerned that you don't know that. But in the Common Application, there is part of your section. It will ask you what kind of grading scale you on. So some countries will be on a grading scale of 10 or 20, or lots of others. So there are some choices, but also don't get overly stressed about it if you're not sure. It's also going to talk to you about course selectivity, things like AP courses or honors level courses, some of which are also very American curriculum styled. It doesn't mean that you have not completed selective courses and coursework at your high school within your country. Admissions counselors who are reading international applications will be very well versed on your particular country's grading scale, as well as national curriculum, as well as other kinds of curriculums like IB, A-level, West African exams, and GCSEs, and much, much more. So you don't have to worry so much about having to explain that in an application. We're going to talk in a few moments about sort of finding the right fit. And one of the things about finding the right fit is asking questions for universities that you're about to apply to about things like acceptance rate and what the middle 50% is for schools. At Stony Brook, our acceptance rate is about 49%. So this year we received over 55,000 applications. Our highest number ever, and we received our highest number of international applications with over 5,500 international applications. So less than half of those are admitted to the university at 49%. So you want to consider that when looking where to apply. And how to do that is not just saying, oh, well, only a 50% chance I'm not going to apply, is by looking at university websites on what's known as the middle 50%. The middle 50% will tell you what the average GPA on a US scale is, what the average SAT scores are on that middle 50%, if a student has submitted those scores. Excuse me. So at Stony Brook, on a US 100 scale, our middle 50% of GPAs is about a 92 to a 97, and SAT about a 1270 to 1450. So more than 50% of our applicant pool had that kind of range in scores and GPA. So I talked a lot about terms. I spent a lot of time about that. So when you are getting to apply, you now have a sense of some of these terms that they're going to ask you throughout the application, and you'll be able to have an understanding of what they mean. But before you actually start going in after you watch this presentation, you really want to think a little bit about what you're looking for in a college before you hit that submit button on an application. And I'm not going to spend too much time because a lot of this is a little bit about your own research and some of it is about self-reflection. So self-reflection a little bit on your academic interests. What are your career goals? What subjects are you good at? And does it match the majors offered at the university? It is okay if you don't know career goals or if you have multiple career goals. It is perfectly normal at your age to be undecided, and many universities, including Stony Brook, will have undecided as a major. But one of the things to remember is when you're talking about career goals is there are multiple ways to get to that career goal. It's not just always one major equals that career goal. Just because a lot of times I like to use pre-med as an example. A lot of people want to be a doctor, and in the US, medicine is a graduate level program, and you will complete your undergraduate degree with a pre-med track and then apply to medical school. But I often ask students, why do they want to be a doctor? And we get a whole range of answers. And most of are within the, they want to help people, they like science, and there are a lot of health related professions that are not just being a doctor or being a nurse. But at Stony Brook University, we are a full-fledged research university hospital and medical school, as well as our academic programs. So the tie to our hospital and our medical school will have a whole school of health professions with majors in things like respiratory care therapy and radiation technology, all still achieving the same career goal. So there are multiple majors, including our health science major, that will get you to some of these similar career goals. So this is the time of self-reflection about what are all of the options out there that I may be interested in. You also don't have to know that. Options change and career goals change as you learn new things. So again, coming to Stony Brook, where there's this flexibility of curriculum and courses, allows you to be flexible and change. Other things that you may be looking for in a college are things like location and size. Do I want to be in a city or a suburban area? How big of a school do I want? Is housing guaranteed? How far is the travel from a major international airport to that university? So I can tell you right now, Stony Brook is about an hour outside of New York City. So we're about an hour from the major airport, JFK Airport. But we're in a suburban area. We're not in a city. We're very residential, traditional campus. Cost is going to, of course, be really a major factor in students' decision, and you really want to look at total fees, tuition fees, room and board, and how much scholarship may be considered for students, and what is the policy on giving scholarships. And then there's lots of other things that may be important to you. Things like research and clubs and activities that are part of campus, diversity, ranking, safety. And again, it's all okay not to know some of these things. So this is the part where you kind of need to research before you're hitting submit on an application or before you are applying is, where am I applying to? What are my needs here? And everything can't be sort of a number one on here. So what are my own personal rankings of importance of all of these items? Location may be more important than having research, or vice versa. So those things are really what you need to consider and look at, and only you have what's more and most important to you versus what is not. So it's really a self-reflection, and it's doing a little research ahead of time about where you want to apply. So now that you've done some of this research and you want to begin to apply, and maybe you have all summer long, it's really important as you're about to start whatever application system you are, whether that's the SUNY application, the Common application, the Coalition application, another state systems application, that as an international student especially, your names should all match. So the name on your passport should match the names on your transcript, should match the name that you use on the application. This also includes the name and email of your test scores. So if you've taken the SAT, your Duolingo or IELTS or TOEFL should all match. When they don't match and you send them in to universities, when they don't match, we then cannot match them to your application if your names are totally different. That even goes with the email, because a lot of times that can be a factor, especially when you have a common name that maybe 5 other people have. So we will also use things like the date of birth. But in the US, we like to be different than the rest of the world. And we use the format month, date, year. So it could be, when I have in that screen there, MMDDYY, that's your month, your date, and the two-digit code for year. So if I'm using today, August 1st, 2024, that would be 080124. If sometimes schools will use a 4, or even application systems will use a 4-digit code for year. So if that is the example, it would be 08012024. So it's really important that, again, all of these things match, because if they don't, and you switch the date and the month, then again, we will think it's a different student and not match those things. So for example, if you were born today, August 1st, 2024, 08012024, and you switched it to date, date, month, month, year, year, I would think you were born on January 8th. So, and then I would say, oh, this is different than the person who was really born on August 1st. So I hope that helps clarify things. There are other things to consider as you begin to prep to apply. Depending on your country, you may need to VPN into to the Common Application, or just onto US websites where if your country has it blocked, without being able to apply. I know sometimes that is not ideal, but there are sometimes, depending on your country's blocks, no other options to get into the systems. Many of times you need to put the settings in English in order for it to submit, as well as use an English keyboard to put things in English. We tell you not to use foreign characters, as when you are submitting the application, it will then not be recognized. So when the application gets downloaded and all of those fields become into, kind of a file of data, and then gets imported into the university system, any foreign characters that are not on an English scale will then not get imported. Could cause an error in the load, or then we just don't have that information. We know many students will use agents, and can help, of course, with that and with questions, but we are also here for questions. This is what we do, and we are here to answer your questions on how to apply. So I already mentioned that you want to use your name to be the same on your passport and your transcripts and your test scores, as well as your email addresses. But I also like to remind students that often first name and last name, or surname, can also, in an application, sometimes get flipped when students fill it out. So be really intentional on how your name is put into the application as it is reading on your passport and or transcripts. And so I encourage you to kind of make sure with your school that it matches all of those things. The email address, again, should be the same from your application to your test scores, so they can be matched, but it is also one that you should be able to check often. When you are applying to multiple schools, every school is going to be sending you emails with either just basic information about the university, about next steps to complete your application, eventually your decision, as well as if you decide to come to that university, you will then get a whole host of other types of emails. So this is where organization has to be your friend. And I'm a spreadsheet person, but organization is how you best organize yourself. And so I talked about the common application, the coalition application, different testing scores, as well as multiple tests, or as well as multiple schools that you're going to apply to. In which case, everyone is going to have a different deadline, if the different kinds of applications you're applying to, and different requirements. And once you start using all of these systems, you're going to have a username, a password, an ID number, access to a portal, and you kind of need to keep it organized. So however, which way you have your organizational system is how you would want to create something to make sure that you have those usernames and passwords and IDs readily available. And then once actually applying it, or once selecting those schools that you've been interested in, you may want a quick cheat sheet of when is the deadline, when did I submit the application, when did I submit supporting documents, what that portal username and password is after I've applied, with a different username and password from the application system, what's my new ID number specific to that school, so when I contact that school with a question, I have that information readily available. So not only is a spreadsheet or some type of other organizational system important, but I think creating one email that you use to apply to all colleges makes it really easy. That way, all the emails that you're getting from the schools, from Common Application, from College Board, from English proficiency exams, are all coming into that one email and not much else. And then to be even a little more organized, I suggest creating labels and folders per college to stay organized, as well as separate ones for things like College Board, which is SAT, or any of the other exams that you take, as well as Common Application. It will really help you in the long run if you kind of organize yourself that way. It's also then easy sometimes to just, you're going to get a lot of emails once you begin to apply to, say, Stony Brook. We're going to kind of give you basic information about Stony Brook, things like our academics and our location, and maybe you glanced at it really quick, but you're like, okay, this sounds interesting, but I really don't know what it means yet. And you move it to the Stony Brook folder, but now you've been admitted to Stony Brook. And you're like, wait, I want to know more about my academic program. Let me go back to that email and see that it talked about the research that's happening in the College of Engineering. And that now makes me click into a link that talks about a faculty member doing research. And now I'm really interested. So don't just sort of skip over those things and delete them. If you think that may be of interest to you, you can always come back to it later in your new organizational system. So other things to really consider when starting the application, before you submit the application, as well as through the process, is to speak to admissions counselors at each school. So I gave you a lot of general information and kind of weave some Stony Brook information into it, but every school has different requirements. So even some of that general information I gave to you does not apply to every school. Some of it doesn't even apply to Stony Brook, as I mentioned throughout the presentation when it did not apply at Stony Brook. So it's really important to speak to admissions counselors at each school and not just rely on what other people tell you as to what the requirements are, what the deadlines are, what any kind of question it is you may have. I will tell you, the probably most common question I get is literally the day after a student submits the application, pays the $50 application fee, to then ask me about scholarships and say, oh, I did not realize that, and I don't want to consider Stony Brook anymore. So our scholarships range from $1,000 to $6,000 a year. We do offer a half tuition scholarship as well. But some students are expecting full funding, and that is not something on the undergraduate level that we offer at Stony Brook. So if you would have known that before applying, maybe I would have saved somebody some time. So with that, not only speaking to admissions counselors and understanding some of those things for you, but it is having a family conversation about all of those things that are important to you. Especially things like location and budget are really important, especially if they are helping fund your education. I think location is an important one to have a conversation about when you are traveling so far. How, what is your family comfortable with? Keep in mind that people tend to apply to a lot of the same schools, especially international. There are 4,500 schools, yet students only know of a handful of schools that are the same names. It's okay to branch out to other schools and different schools that maybe you didn't hear of, but still has all of the things that are of interest to you and that are needs for you. We know that students live far away sometimes, but coming on a tour is really great. We also have virtual tours, but we also can connect you with students. And so I always like to have students connect and ask things like, what did you do last weekend? What's their favorite class? How much time do you spend studying or doing homework? It's okay to change your mind throughout this process of what you want to study, where you want to study, what kind of school you want to study at. It's okay to change your mind when you get here as well. So it's really just the beginning of a conversation on some of these things, not the end of a conversation. When you apply, there will be lots of components to the application, including filling out your basic demographic information, things like all of your activities listed, submitting an essay, but then you're going to have to send in documents. Things like mark sheets, transcripts, exam results. In the application, it is going to ask you, however, for test scores. A lot of students think that this means, let me submit my A-levels or my West African exams. When it asks you, do you want to submit test scores or go test optional? This, again, only refers to SAT or ACT. So if you are selecting, I want to submit my test scores and think that it's your A-levels, it means that you want to submit SAT scores. And some schools will not then have an option for you to waive that later on, and you will have to submit SAT scores for you to be considered. I already talked a little bit about the difference between SAT and ACT to English proficiency exams. And just because you're test optional does not mean English proficiency is not required. And every school will have its own requirements on what being English, what is required for English proficiency. At Stony Brook, if you are not from an English-speaking country or high school curriculum, then you need to submit a TOEFL, Duolingo, or IELTS exam. So I want to skip for a moment and just talk about a little bit about the U.S. university curriculum. So when you are also considering a place like Stony Brook and applying, you should understand that universities will have what's known as a general education curriculum. This is on top of your major curriculum. It is often a flexible curriculum that will have a large range of a variety of classes in all subjects and disciplines that universities feel will help you be really a lifelong learner. At Stony Brook, we call it the Stony Brook curriculum. It's really a set of skills and objectives that we feel are going to make you successful at Stony Brook and after you graduate. And so within each objective that you have to complete, there are dozens and dozens of options for courses. Some of them are even within your major. Some of them are even experiential, which means sort of outside of the classroom experiences like studying abroad and research. So students take this on top of their major courses. So you're taking courses both in the general education curriculum and your major all 4 years, which can be very different than outside of the US where you're really just taking major focus courses. This also allows for some of that flexibility I was talking about and allowing you to change your mind. So students often sometimes will take a course or two in their first year and decide that they really like a different subject and want to change their major. And that is allowable. There may be different requirements at Stony Brook as well as other universities on how to change your major, but often schools are very flexible in regards to some of those options. It also means you can double major or add a minor. So that is often very popular too. Students, again, take something of interest or just have an interest in general and want to take a double major or a minor, which is a smaller kind of major, 5 or 6 classes within that discipline. When you are double majoring, it does not have to be in the same subject area. So some students think, oh, I'm engineering, so I have to double major in another type of engineering. You can be a engineering major as well as have an economics minor. So there are a lot of flexibility in that area. And coming to the US and choosing to apply to schools in the US really allows for that flexibility in the US curriculum. So I talked a lot about variations of what that is and what that means. So now you have applied to the university. You've submitted your application, you've done all your due diligence, and what is going to happen? From Stony Brook and from most universities, you will receive a confirmation of your application, usually by email. You're probably going to actually receive 2 confirmations. You're first going to receive a confirmation from, let's say you use Common Application or the SUNY application. They're going to send you a confirmation that says you've submitted the application. Those systems have to send the application now to Stony Brook or other schools you've applied to. So that can sometimes take a few days. And then the university will send you a confirmation of your application. In that application, again, you probably will get an ID number to that school, access to a portal. We call that portal Start SBU at Stony Brook. And oftentimes there will be a checklist of items to submit. It will vary by school, and you are going to want to go back to your organizational system to see, what do I still need to submit? Jot down those ID numbers, even the link to the portal, so you have it readily available and understand what needs to be done and when it needs to be done. Application materials that are after the deadline at many schools will be considered late and may not be reviewed for admission. So it's really important when I say tips for applying, do not wait to the deadline. I can't tell you how many times I get emails, you know, if the application closes on January 15th, like I get applications at like 10 or emails at like 10 p.m. asking questions about the application. And sometimes by then it's too late. So fill it out, submit it. Really, I say start now because it's August 1st and do that now. But if you're waiting closer to the deadline, give yourself a week at most before the deadline to get any of those questions out. You're not going to get that confirmation email for a day or two. It's really important to not wait until the last day. Okay, so I talked a lot, and let's just go through a couple of sort of next steps. What should we do? A self-reflection. Again, what are some of my interests? Things that I really am interested in. Academics, location, costs, etc. Should I and when do I want to take the SAT and register for that if that's something I need to do? Create that organizational system. Search for schools online, add your email to mailing lists so you can start getting information even before you apply. Take some campus tours, even virtually. And remember to study. You still have to get good grades, and you may be asked for grades in that final year. So you definitely want to do that. So I know I talked a lot about different tips on how to apply. I hope that makes you ready to apply online and submit those applications. I didn't talk a lot about Stony Brook, but I will just mention a few things. We are a large comprehensive research university located in Stony Brook, New York, which is a residential, suburban, safe area an hour outside of New York City. We do offer over 200 academic majors and programs. We do offer scholarships for international students. We are ranked in the top 1% of universities in the world and a top public university in New York State. We do have a regular decision deadline of January 15th, but also an early action deadline of November 1st, which we do highly encourage students to apply to. We review applications and render decisions on a monthly basis. So students will receive decisions typically on a monthly scale. But it really will depend on when you apply with the volume of applications. Even if you apply in December, you still might not be hearing until March, depending on the volume of applications we have. I encourage all students to connect with us and contact the admissions office with further questions. I want to thank you so much for joining us today, and I'm going to open it up to questions for those who are on the call, as well as stop sharing my screen. So thank you so much.